Hi, I'm Cassia Streb with Music for Your Inbox, and today we are going to chat with our artists from this month, our visual artists that created the film, and our sound artists who collaborated together. They are Mengxi Yang, who's an animator, and then the audio team was Shuwen Zhao and Brian Griffith, who are better known as Squash and Biscuit. So I'm going to take a moment to invite them and we can talk about their film. It's called Seven Little Trains.
Hey, Brian.
Hello.
Oh, hello, Mengxi. Nice to
Hi.
see you. Hi. So yeah, I wanted to talk to you, the three of you. First of all, thanks for joining me. And so Brian is speaking on behalf of the Squash and Biscuit side of things, but also a lot of the video editing that happened. And then, of course, Mengxi was responsible for a lot of the animation. But it does feel like this film is so well integrated. It's hard as a watcher to parse out like, oh, this belongs to this person and that person. And so I think I really wanted to talk to you about how you came up with this film and how you put it together. Because I was at the sort of pre-production meetings when Squash and Biscuit were describing this concept of having these little windows of sound opening and how that would be reflected in the video. And I felt like I more or less, I mean, I trust them because I've worked with them before, but I feel like Mengxi did just a great job of kind of really realizing that idea for them. And so, yeah, if we could start, maybe Brian, if you could tell us a little bit about that audio, the idea that you had for having the windows appear in the layers of audio and how that reflected in the video, and sort of explain that maybe a little better than I just did.
Sure. I mean, the idea kind of started just with the desire to have kind of like different layers of like close sounds or tiny sounds. So like throughout the entire video, you'll hear very delicate sounds. You'll see that also represented on the screen, and so that was, I think, a an interesting like sound idea to play with, at least from the beginning, and then having the kind of one-to-one relationship between what you see on screen and then what you hear was also something that you know was inspiring for us. And early on as we were talking about it, as Shun and I were talking about it, that ended up turning into uh, this idea of like windows or almost like collage as a way to represent different uh, different aspects that were happening simultaneously. Um, if that makes sense, because like as we exist in the as we exist in the world, we see kind of one uh, one image through our eyeballs, but I guess like the window idea for the video that we created is kind of like a way to visually represent the constant stream or the simultaneous thoughts and ideas that are always occurring. Um, yeah, I think that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'm wondering, like Mengzi, when they sort of wrapped you into this project, what were the sort of parts that you were most interested in working on?
Hi. Yeah, so it was pretty early on that we already talked about the Windows idea, and I thought that was really a good start already. And it became the whole structure of the film that it was giving all of us a lot of freedom to put what we want into the structure of visual and audio, mutually inspired, and putting things into those windows that as a collection or an archive that we can play with, where Ryan and Shuwen probably also arranged together in their editing process. So it was at the beginning, it was already feeling like I'm very excited for have the creative freedom to just add stuff to this collaboration. And I have kind of my own practice of object animation, and this time because the sound has a side of very textured, how do you say? It's from like real recordings, very analog. And then there's the side where it's all synthetic, and I created more 2D animation, digital feeling to match the other aspect of the sound. So I feel like there is this loose language that we're creating, but we have a lot of freedom too. Oh, I think we're losing Brian a little bit. Maybe just the image.
It'll come back. I think it's sort of sometimes odd with this particular platform. Because, yeah, you mentioned that you have a practice of that, and that's actually something, one of the pieces that I was really drawn to in your online portfolio is this reimagining, like you've taken the dialogue between a woman whose father was an artist, and she's being interviewed, and she's describing the art that he's making as he's like living through cognitive decline, and you are kind of imagining what those art objects look like. And I really like that piece because it's sort of like you're playing on someone else's imagination through your own imagination, and it felt sounds like you're talking about kind of applying a similar process to this film. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's a really good idea because I think from what you said, it reminds me of how I was making the other film is kind of a exchange of ideas with someone else that you throw something at them and then you use the material to make something new. And then that's what we're doing this year. And we have done a little collaboration before, but I feel like it's very easy to work with Squash and Biscuit, that we're on the kind of the same working habits to just create what we like and then have not a very strict like mindset of what it's going to be later. It's the process that matters. So I do enjoy the kind of collecting and making it from memories, but making a new piece of memory as it goes into the visual and audios.
Yeah, I was seeing a lot of images of different objects that you chose to include and that Brian and Joanne included. Were they all things that were used to create the sounds? Like, for instance, I'm thinking of like a tea cake, and there were others like small objects, or were some of them just things that you felt like sounded like what possibly could have made the sounds?
Oh, is this for Brian?
Either one of you, or I guess, yeah, maybe Brian, how did you, so I'm just inviting Julian again. How did you like decide which objects would appear in the film from what you used?
You know, that had a lot to do with like what they sounded like. Truthfully, I mean, there was some aesthetic consideration for sure, but in terms of like the filmed objects that we chose, ultimately, I think we ended up using most of them because we ended up shooting quite a few videos, and we ended up using most of them. Yeah, based mostly on the sonic qualities, and they were chosen initially from for their sound quality as well. So like the tea cake, for example, is something that that kind of was always going to be a part of it. But something like the weird doll, and it just sounded good, so we grabbed it and then ended up using it. But I think the sound quality of the object is kind of the first consideration, and then not too far off is like, would this actually look interesting or would it look appealing?
Right, right. Well, because you were using a lot of green screen too, which is, I don't remember who was editing it in the end, but that those parts. But I thought that was kind of a neat. It creates it kind of leans into what Mengxi was talking about earlier, this like handmade quality, because it's sort of like leaning into not just like a computer generated graphic or something, because it is a real object, and then it's sort of hovering on top of these layers. Um, Mengxi, when you were working on the animation, did you have specific areas that you knew you were responsible for, or were you kind of moving through the film intuitively and adding what you felt like where you wanted to?
Um, I think while we were working on it, we figured out maybe the progression of the film will be at first it's how do you say motivated by the sound that Squash and Biscuit created. So they laid it out first and then worked on it throughout. But I had uh, kind of the map of how at the beginning there would be more live action videos that actually the sound was recorded from, or a kind of a landscape that is less animated, but then later it will become the sound will become more synthetic, and the visual will become more maybe disoriented with animation and less reality based on. But it's a transition, so I do want to slowly working from the object animation that still represents real life towards more digital space and 2D animation that are hand-drawn. That's a general idea, and throughout working, I think there's a big part on compositing. That's Brian is doing it, that we did together. That's doing his magic. So yeah, that's kind of the process. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really neat to kind of pull it apart because it's so intertwined and so mixed, which I really like. It's so well integrated that it's hard to sort of tell because we didn't know. In fact, Jen and I watched it several times, of course, and then when we finally were attaching the credits, we were like, oh my gosh, like there were different people doing all sorts of things, which was sort of a nice surprise because it just means that the sort of technical aspects are varied and that we're just able to enjoy the art. I did notice that there were some um, places that appeared. Like it's very kind of, it feels geographically like located somewhere because there are some live action things. There's of course this shot of the trains, like the not Metrolink, sorry, the LA Metro, going by, and then there's some outdoor shots, and then there's also a room at the end, kind of just with like the light changing. And I'm wondering, was that just sort of because that's where you were, or are we kind of trying to be somewhere in the piece? Like, is geography important? Either one of you can answer that, by the way.
Sure. I think that yes, kind of. That the that was kind of like a carryover from a kind of one initial idea that that kind of Shun and I had talked about, like kind of before even like starting this, um, because you know, we talked about like this idea of like windows and they're like layers on top of something, and we were trying to figure out what that something is, like what is the background, what are these layers going to be on, and we didn't really like there were a couple of ideas that we had thought about, but one thing that was kind of interesting that tied in with the overall idea of, you know, moving from reality back into one's mind and then like mixing is idea of like movement in a way. So I guess like geography is important, but it's also it's more of like a stand-in for movement. Um, so initially, one thought we had was to start with someplace pretty wide and expansive, which we do, but then move to something that's more middle, and then finally end in something that's close, like a room or something.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up not using that like middle section, like the middle, and having you know, having it feel more transitory or like more I don't know, it just kind of it almost gives a sense of travel, because if you start, at least kind of like how we're like thinking about it, or like how, you know, if you view it, I think that it does feel like you're out somewhere, then you know, are like lost in thought, but then you kind of eventually come back in not a fully grounded reality, but back into kind of like a safe space, a personal space, but with kind of like everything you've experienced or learned in a
Mm-hmm.
way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to go back to like geography, it's not necessarily geography, it's more about like the sense of travel, journeying, movement,
Right.
and gathering these things along the way.
Because I noticed that, like, Mengxi, I'm curious if you have a art practice that is outside of animation, like with art objects, because everything feels very handmade that you're making, but the reality is, I mean, I don't know how to do exactly what you do, but I'm saying I understand like the software that you're using and things like that, and it is very tech heavy, tech forward. You have to be very fluent in the programs that you're using, and yet you're still able to keep this handmade feeling about it. It feels very tactile. I'm curious, like, how do you kind of keep that alive and not just get lost in the technology? Do you have a practice of sculpting or something in the physical world?
Yeah, so I work in stop motion mostly. It is very tactile. It is very much like building miniature sets with for the camera. Everything is uh, like from early technology is not very digitalized yet. So that is what I like about handmade stuff, and I've gotten this career, and I want to keep exploring and keep this quality of handmade. How do you say? It's very it triggers like the sensation in your brain when you look at things that are very textured and very um, like both with sound and image, that you feel like more immersive than just watching something really fast and colorful, and um, that you're lost in all kinds of digital numbers. So I've been trying to work from home. For this film at least, I set up a whole shooting stage at home, and I use a lot of objects that are meaningful to me or to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Shun.
Hello.
And
I'm sorry I'm
yeah,
very late.
Okay, no problem at all. We were just talking about what Mengzi is doing in her practice to keep it like looking tactile and visceral and real. And she was talking about, do you have a home studio for your stop motion?
yeah. So it's a not a very hard, complicated setup, but the quality, like with animation, you can definitely get into it and try to get everything very smooth. But I try to work fast and collect the quantity of it, at least for this project, instead of focusing on making everything perfect. And that came together. I think that makes sense for this project.
Yeah, right. And that probably also keeps it like a sort of, I don't want to say less polished because it was kind of on purpose, but this homespun feeling to it was definitely, I'm sure, because you were working faster and just trying to get it's more like grand gestures as opposed to very precision, like line
Yeah.
drawings or something. And then, so, Juan and Brian, I'm thinking about your audio, like the music that you wrote for it. I know that you both have a lot of abilities with, again, with tech and with the software and engineering and things like that, and yet it really feels like handmade. Like I feel like I mean, especially that I can see the instrument you're playing in the moment you're playing it. That certainly is helpful, but it does feel very real and visceral and alive. And I'm wondering if you do things in your own recording techniques that kind of lean away from over polishing and over like what I'm talking about is the sound doesn't have like a ton of reverb. It doesn't have a lot of processing. It sounds very much like I'm sitting right there. Even though I know that you know how to do that. I'm curious like why you choose to um, keep everything very like raw, I guess.
Um, Specifically for like maybe the smaller, more acoustic objects,
Hmm.
or in general, is
Yeah.
that something you're
No,
talking about?
No, I'm at the smaller, like the actual instruments. Like when I hear them initially, I feel like I'm really hearing that exact sound.
Hmm. I think like I'm not sure. I guess it was a choice to not add any sort of effects to it, but
Hmm.
I think it's more just a matter, I guess more a matter of like taste,
Hmm.
um, or just, in a way, it's like kind of like celebrating these small objects.
Right.
It's like bringing some awareness to something that you don't um, necessarily a lot of times have the ability to hear because we're always in a noisy environment, or you choose not to pay attention to. Um, and kind of like early on, as when we, even kind of before we signed on to this, like Shuan and I had talked about the idea of kind of extending and expanding like a small like series of stuff we've done called invisible sounds, where we kind of like do just that, where it's like we focus on um, mostly like field recordings or environments, and just try to get like kind of like short snapshots of these places that you might go to but maybe not intentionally like listen to, and so building from there, um, having these like small objects manipulated by hands uh, also does a similar thing where, because it's like a pretty close shot, because there's nothing else but the object in the hands and there's no added effects, it's very dry. It kind of like forces you to listen
Hmm.
um, to the objects.
Yeah. And then I think because that thing, the project you're referring to that's on like the Squash and Biscuit website, at least that's the public facing part of it, um, where you're like these sort of invisible spaces and the cracks and things like that. I'm curious, Juan, like for you, when you first started to really listen to those sounds, like when did it really start to integrate into your art? Because I know that you were trained, I believe, as a classical pianist. I'm wondering, like, has that curiosity always been there, or do you feel like it's a sort of newer part of your practice?
Yeah, it's definitely new practice to me because I'm not, I have no training background for that traditional instrument, the shell. Yeah, so I just start like practicing my breath. I'm sorry, I'm in a donut shop, so sometimes you might
Ooh,
get extra noise.
now we're all just wanting donuts. Don't
Great.
apologize.
Yeah, yeah, but we know that all the trivial, we like trivial sounds in life. Uh, but usually I feel like as we use field recordings too, so it's like the ambience where usually the space that those instruments that make sounds are different than things that happen in our video because it's just field recording, so it's live sound. It's really trivial sound. So if we listen to them for a very long time, like an hour, definitely nobody can stand that. Or it would be like, oh, why you're presenting that? But I feel like because if we pick up those small moments and put them together, that's kind of like type of the composition we want to make. So, and also in terms of like presenting our live state, yeah, we had meetings talk about this with Mengxi too, several times. It's like, oh, which type of art we want to put in our experimental project. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it sounds like the end result is incredibly intentional and it feels like on purpose. It doesn't sort of feel like, well, we had these recordings lying around. But it is a different way of listening, and I think it achieves its goal. I'm curious if, like, I guess Squash and Biscuit, I don't know which one is which. I don't think it's important to determine that, but I feel like what I'm curious about is to know how this experience of making a film out of your scores, because I know that you made a lot of music, how that impacted, like, how do you hear your music when you look at the film? Does it sound kind of different to you? Do you feel like different things are highlighted, or are there things that are emphasized in a way that were surprising to you?
Um, uh, I'm sorry. I disconnected for a second. Can you
Oh,
can you just
no
repeat that
problem.
question
Yeah, no problem. What
one
I'm
more
saying
time?
is that, like, um, when I heard, for instance, we're making a video right now with a different ensemble for like many months in the future. And originally they sent us an audio track and I listened to it and I was like, fantastic. And now they sent us the video and I was like, holy smokes, this sounds very different, even though I know it is exactly the same audio track, but I'm hearing it differently because I'm looking at images moving in that way. And I'm curious because y'all did your sound first and you sort of signed off on what it would look like and sound like. What is this experience like of doing a visual accompaniment for your audio? Like were there anything surprising? Were there sounds that you realized were more emphasized or de-emphasized?
Hmm. Well, I mean, for the first part, we did the visuals and the sounds simultaneously, and um, that was kind of the intention of that. Or I guess it's not that. I mean, obviously we did the sound and the video simultaneously because that's the nature of recording. But um, I guess we also kind of arranged it and composed it at the same time. So it was. Uh, you know, especially for the first half, we just kind of had these bits and pieces,
Mm-hmm.
and then, um, and then you kind of let both the sound and the video dictate how it moved, how it flowed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so like we kind of did like a little, back and forth of like, oh, do we like these sounds? Maybe this should appear here. Maybe it should appear here. Um, but ultimately, like it kind of happened at the same time, at least for the first half. The second half uh, was much more sound first.
Mm.
Like that was, but a similar approach. So in the first more like real world half, we gathered the object recordings, all the sounds, and just had a pile of them. Just had a folder filled with stuff. We did the same thing for the last half too. Like instead of because we wanted to try to have as much of a one-to-one sound relationship to the animation as well. So um, we tried to imagine what the animations could be, and ended up recording, just like over the course of like an afternoon or two, Shwin and I just did a couple, 2 or 3 minute improvisations that were uh, that 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 we knew were going to be part of our palette, but not exactly sure how it would happen,
Right.
or if it would happen. Because with that, there were I think a few that we didn't use, that just didn't make sense. But we ended up, um, you know, trying to put that together first, and then give as much of a relationship with the animation as possible, kind of similar to the first thing. Um, so I would say there might have been maybe more surprises in the second half, especially in terms of how like the visuals and the sound could work together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yes, yes, I think that's I've lost the thread of this thought,
No, no,
but I
no.
think that
That was actually really helpful to kind of hear how it goes together because it sounds like, of course, you didn't have an entire audio track and then hand it over to Mengxi and then she made things out of it that you were surprised by. It sounds like the process was very much handmade and hand built throughout. Um, and then so for you, Mengxi, with your filmmaking, you seem incredibly connected to sound throughout your practice. It sounds almost to me like you're often receiving the inspiration from an audio like recording and then creating the stop motion after the fact. Is that generally true for your kind of projects moving forward as well?
Yeah, if it's up to me, like my personal projects or things I'm interested in, I think sound plays a really important part, and
Hmm.
that's why I feel like I can let myself go a little bit before I determine where the project can go. Uh, in this, like Squash and Biscuits already have ideas for their sound and they've been collecting sound. So I feel like it's a good flow already. And then I'm usually inspired by, I'm really inspired by the kind of, how do you say, even dialogue or whatever is happening in the soundscape that I can find things to match it. I can find, like, feels like it's solving a puzzle. It's like I'm working to make the best visual and audio combination to kind of surprise myself or, give a little new ideas to whatever the bigger project is. And something, because like I said, I work in sound motion and the industry feels like it could be based more on narrative storytelling. And when you look at it with a big camera, it's very focused on details. Everything has to be perfect. But so with project like this, I would really like to, go the other direction and be more free and explore the kind of more experimental ways of matching sounds with whatever visual that is, how do you say, like a poetic description or an explanation or a counterpart for the idea.
Right. Yeah, that's really neat. I'm so grateful to all three of you for jumping on and chatting with me about this film, about your practice in general. And I'm also really happy that Squash and Biscuit was able to introduce us to Mengxi and her work, because that was like a great new thing for us to learn about. We were just, yeah, anyhow, I can't wait to see more. So this month, these are our featured video artists, and people can watch your film, Seven Little Trains, on our platform. And I guess, tickets are available on our website, which gives you instant access to watch the film and listen. I recommend some good headphones or some good audio monitors, because there's a lot of wonderful details I don't want people to miss. So yeah, thanks to you all, and I hope to see you in real life or on the internet sometime soon.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you for having us. It was a real fun experience, and glad we could make a weird thing for you.
Anytime.
Yes.
We're the one-stop shop.
It's a treat.
All right, take care, everybody. Have a good Thursday, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes,